thank you, Chargé d'Affaires, Mr. Stephen Walker. Let's all express our appreciation for participating in our conference and for the stand you have been taking in support of the oppressed Eritrean people. And we can assure that your bold statement has given hope to many Eritreans. We really thank you and highly appreciate what you have been and your office been doing while working in this difficult situation. Here are some of the questions received from our audience. Let me read them as they are. In a country of 6 million people, there is only one person who can freely speak and express his mind in public, and that happens to be you, Mr. Chargé d'Affaires Stephen Walker. How does it feel to be the only person to be afforded that fundamental human right? And how hard is it for you to watch the entire nation whom you interact in a daily basis lacks freedom of expression?
Great, okay. We're working out the technical difficulties. You know, as you all know, Eritrea is a wonderful country and you know, beloved to my heart, but when it comes to technology and the internet, it's a little difficult. So, but I'm so happy to be able to join you from Asmara. So let me answer that question by first talking about the Eritrean people. You know, the Eritrean people are, as I said, they've been so warm and welcoming. They're hardworking, smart people. And something that I've noticed, you know, I've been in many different assignments around the world. And the thing that strikes me about the Eritrean people that is both really special and really interesting is that they are at the same time modest, humble people, and yet they're also fiercely proud of their nation and what they've achieved, especially from that long, difficult 30-year struggle for national independence. And so they're humble, and yet they're very proud without being arrogant at all. And I think that's because Eritreans know who they are, and they're proud of who they are, and they've just been wonderful. You know, there's so much potential in Asmara, in Eritrea. Asmara is a beautiful capital city. There are wonderful, you know, it's strategically located on the Red Sea and in the Horn of Africa. You know, there are any number of potential, you know, tourist destinations, you know, particularly since, you know, it's getting here to Eritrea, it only takes an hour, a little over an hour from Addis Ababa. And there are a lot of tourists that go to Ethiopia that I think, you know, under the right conditions would say, yeah, let's add a few days in Eritrea to our itinerary. And so you asked me how I feel. I feel sort of sad that this potential, the potential of Eritrea and the Eritrean people is limited by the lack of freedom and the lack of human rights and the lack of coherent economic policies. You know, in particular, you know, indefinite, mandatory, lifelong, you know, national service that reduces citizens to, you know, in essence, indentured servants of the state. That combined with these outdated, you know, economic policies that are not business friendly, they combine to prevent Eritrea from developing in the way that it could, and that saddens me. It's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. For the last 30 years, the government of Eritrea is known for human rights violation. Even though there were reports from the US State Department annually about those violations, the embassy in Eritrea has never publicly called out on the government. However, after your assignment as Chargé d'Affaires, the US embassy in Eritrea, it's continuously calling out the government for its gross human rights violations. Why, after 30 years of silence, your office is calling out the Eritrean government in public now? Is this your personal conviction of defending human rights violation, or a change in US policy dealing with the Eritrean government?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we're up. So we're back and forth. Super. So first, let me say I disagree with that it's been 30 years of silence. Over the past 20 years, the U.S. Has issued annual reports, the ones you mentioned, on international religious freedom and on human rights and others. The U.S. government has issued public statements. We've supported international efforts to encourage the Eritrean government to reform and improve its human rights record. In 2009 and 2011, we supported UN sanctions on Eritrea as a measure to try to get it to take a better to perform better both on its domestic human rights record, as well as to end its destabilizing regional activities. And we also engaged in quiet diplomacy. Some diplomacy is very public, like you see on our Facebook page and in U.S. public statements. But really, a lot of what we do is quiet diplomacy, in talking with government officials, in visits between U.S. officials and Eritrean officials, both here in Asmara and then Eritrean officials in the United States. So there's this quiet diplomacy too. My predecessors were every bit as supportive of human rights in Eritrea as I am. So what changed? Well, Eritrea's involvement in the conflict in northern Ethiopia intensified the U.S. concern about Eritrea's human rights abuses, because it's not only a horrific human rights record inside Eritrea, but Eritrean forces, and I take no joy in saying this, I know that all Eritreans hold their country dear, but the Eritrean armed forces committed, really horrific human rights violations. I know that's difficult, and I recognize as an American, looking back at the Iraq War, that part of war are these human rights abuses. And let me just take a moment to say that one of the Ministry of Information here has simply called all these allegations of human rights abuses by Eritrean forces in northern Ethiopia as just an attempt to defame Eritrea. That's not. These are facts. Just like the Aksum massacre, that was a fact. It happened. And there's been extensive media reporting by many credible media organizations. There have been international, human investigations by international human rights NGOs like the Nobel Prize winning Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, et cetera. Now, the Eritrean Ministry of Information has dismissed all that as, those are all, the Washington Post and the New York Times and Reuters. They're all an Amnesty International. They're all tools of the State Department and any of all of those who live in the United States know how ridiculous that is. But if you don't support or believe in those sources, then the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has documented in detail the abuses of Eritrean forces, including in Aksum. So has the Ethiopian Attorney General and the United Nations. And in saying that, it's not Eritrea, all parties in that horrible conflict have committed human rights violations. All parties, all violators of human rights violations should be held accountable. It's not just Eritrea, although Eritrean forces committed many abuses. So quiet diplomacy, as I mentioned earlier, is one tool to use at a certain time. And then louder or more public diplomacy, which is what we're doing now, is another tool. And as you mentioned, as you know, that we have been quite vocal in defending human rights on our MSC Asmara Facebook page. Another thing that I decided to do was that given the importance of stopping this violence in northern Ethiopia, was to challenge the Ministry of Information when it sought to discredit the United States, to give misinformation about the United States and distort US policies. That I have been very vigorous in doing. I hope I have done so respectfully. I know I have done so accurately. and I will continue doing that. My goal as the chief of mission at the U.S. Embassy in Asmara is to ensure that Eritreans in Eritrea, Eritreans in the United States, and Eritreans all over the world have an accurate understanding of what U.S. policy is. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to agree with it, but it means at least let's have a respect for truth and accuracy. You know, we talk about freedom of expression, but with freedom comes responsibility. So everything we have put on our Facebook page is accurate. It is correct. We do not engage in false misinformation and propaganda, period. Thank you for the question. That was good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Charged Affairs Stephen Walker. So my name is Henok again. I'm the executive director of Erisat, and also I'm the producer and the journalist. So the next question I would like to ask you is, as you know, since 2011, 11 journalists of private newspaper and 15 high-ranking government officials and 2 U.S. embassy workers, namely Kiflom Gabriel Mikhail and Ali Al-Amin, have been disappeared, and their whereabouts is still unknown. Has the U.S. government done anything to secure the release of the victims, especially the embassy U.S. workers, as they have been disappeared because they are association with the U.S. embassy? Has anything been done yet?
As I mentioned earlier, you know, and as all of you who follow our embassy Facebook page know, that you know, we regularly remind the world of the G15, and we regularly call for them to be released, as well as not just the G15, but all political prisoners in Eritrea. In fact, I did so a few minutes ago, and we will continue doing that. Now, in addition, as I just mentioned, in addition to our Facebook page and U.S. public statements, we also engage in quiet diplomacy. And American diplomats over many years, well, since 2001, when Kiflam and Ali were arrested and others were arrested, we have engaged on, you know, through quiet diplomacy on a variety of issues with the Eritrean government, including our concerns about political prisoners. Now, I'm not at liberty to discuss the nature of those private diplomatic conversations, but I will look you all in the eye and tell you that we have not forgotten our dear embassy employees, nor have we forgotten others who in subsequent years have been imprisoned for either expressing their views or for who their parents were, or for any other reason, and then held without trial, often in horrible conditions. Thank you for the question.
Thank you again. And the next question we got from the audience will be, what's the likelihood that democratic voices in Eritrea, as well as in the diaspora, could get American support for change? And how can we work together to advance human rights and democracy in Eritrea, and peace and stability in the region as well?
Eritrea's future is for the Eritrean people to decide. Thank you for the question.
As we know, Eritrea is one of the poorest nations in the world, and the vast majority of the population lives under extreme poverty. Why is the U.S. doesn't provide humanitarian aid to the impoverished Eritrean people? Because the U.S. government, support a lot of, different people all over the world. So why hasn't been any humanitarian aid given to the Eritrean people?
Yeah, no, very good question. I'm glad you asked it. It's correct that we don't provide any direct humanitarian assistance or food aid to Eritrea. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is that Eritrea hasn't asked us, and that Eritrea expelled USAID from Eritrea in 2005. So we can't provide direct, we're not allowed to provide, nor have we been asked to provide direct humanitarian assistance. But supporting the Eritrean people is very important to the United States. And so this commitment to the Eritrean people is manifest in the indirect assistance that we provide. Now, for reasons for time, I'm not going to go into all of the details, but we support a lot of the programming that the local UN mission here does. Well, you know, we are, the United States is one of the biggest supporter of UNHCR, and I believe one of the main, if not the biggest supporters of the UNICEF and the World Food Program, all three of which do very important, provide very important assistance to refugees here. Excuse me, to Eritreans in Eritrea, some of whom are refugees. That would be UNHCR, of course, and then others are people that live here. The U.S. is also the primary financial backer of two important health-related NGOs, and that assistance has been critical to Eritrea's impressive success in vaccination. And most of the Eritreans are vaccinated against many of these horrible diseases. And that so that the Eritrean children now, the chances that they can grow up, make it through babyhood and thrive as children, and then of course as adults, is dramatically higher. And I, as an American, am very proud of the role that my country has played there. There are also ways that Eritrea benefits from U.S. assistance that provided in the region. You know, a good example is the locust eradication efforts. USAID has a really robust program in East Africa that has detection centers and then assists countries to eradicate the locusts, and many times before they get to Eritrea. And so Eritrea is not a direct beneficiary of that, of our locust eradication efforts, nor does the government receive any direct assistance, but American assistance indirectly helps the local locust eradication efforts. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Charged Affairs, can I follow up on this one?
Please.
As you know, there are almost more than 100,000 refugees in Ethiopia, in Tigray region. And then we know that, those refugees are between two fires, because of the war in Ethiopia and Tigray. And then there hasn't been any resettlement done to those refugees. Has there any plan by the US government or the State Department to help those refugees to resettle into the United States or any other countries? If there is anything, can you please help us know?
I don't have any details on specific programs or specific actions that the United States is now taking to address the issue of Eritrean refugees in the Tigray region or other areas of Ethiopia. But what I can tell you is that there are again, the U.S. is one of the main supporters, financial supporters of UNHCR, and that we have a refugee coordinator from the State Department's Bureau of Population, Migration, Refugees at our embassy in Addis Ababa. They work, around the clock to provide assistance, and even some supplemental assistance. I know, for example, that our embassy in Addis Ababa has been in connection with counterparts at our embassy in Cairo recently, I'm sure you all know, there were some very terrible issues with Eritrean refugees in Libya. And so we were trying to work with the UN and UNHCR to help resolve that. And of course, many of those were Eritrean refugees. And so in East Africa and the Horn, that we've given $115 million to UNHCR. So I'm sorry that I can't give you specifics, but I can answer that question in a general way that yes, the U.S. is aware of that one of the many horrible results of the conflict in northern Ethiopia has been that it has created new refugees, displaced refugees, particularly Eritrean refugees that were living in northern Ethiopia, and created lots of internally displaced persons of Ethiopians themselves, and that the United States has been working very hard to address those problems within its broader context of the major effort that we have been making, that I'm very proud of actually, as an American citizen, as well as an American diplomat, all of the efforts we have been taking to address the humanitarian needs of people, innocent, normal, simple people that have been uprooted and negatively affected by the conflict in northern Ethiopia, and of course in efforts to bring a cessation of the violence there, and to make sure that the humanitarian needs of people suffering are met.
Thank you. Leila, it's for you now.
The next question is one of the commonly raised ones, and it says, in the last 30 years, the government in Eritrea have blamed the US government and the CIA for all the socio-economic and political problems in Eritrea. As a result, many Eritreans have deep misinterest towards the US government. What have the US government and your office done to gain the trust of the Eritrean people? Does the US bear any responsibility for what is happening in Eritrea?
I would agree with you that the Eritrean government, be it through speeches by, public officials or the Ministry of Information, has distorted US policy and pumped out a great deal of misinformation. And it's created a narrative that reinforces, in schools and, at Sawa. I imagine some of you have gone through Sawa, so you would know firsthand. I would imagine, they've created this narrative on the one hand, where America is just this hostile, has always been hostile to Eritrea, will always be hostile to Eritrea, and that all of our problems are a result from this evil America. So on one hand. On the other, the government refuses, as we spoke about earlier, to permit alternative viewpoints or dissent, and so there's no one here actively challenging that narrative. And so I would imagine that Eritreans living here in Eritrea may have colored their view of the United States. I don't know whether these efforts to villainize the United States have succeeded. My sense, though, is that they have not. And one of the reasons is that we have media platforms like Erisat that are trying to provide alternative views. And so all I can do is try to correct the record, provide accurate information, and challenge the Ministry of Information when it distorts US policy. Now, as for the other part of your question, I would urge that we look towards the future. All of you, I'm sure, have views about things that happened in the past, and American policies that have happened. We could engage in hours of unproductive conversation about, this, and then that. United States should have done this. You can go around and around in that. What I would urge us to be forward-looking is how can we work together to make sure that the Eritrea's future is better? That's what I think, rather than go back in the past. It's an interesting thing here is that they seem very, very focused in the past. In fact, if I had a dime for every time an Eritrean official reminded me that in 1951, John Foster Dulles said, in the interest of justice, the Eritrean position must be taken into consideration, but that our interests demand that we continue to support Eritrea, Ethiopia's inclusion of Eritrea. I'd be a rich man, and that's true. I mean, I try to be accurate and honest and fair, and I don't shy away from, dealing with issues where, that there might have been disagreements in US policy. I can understand how Eritreans would remember that and not like that. However, as an American, looking back at the time and the context of 1951, of when the Cold War was just beginning, that Kanu Station, our military installation here, was of critical national, vital national importance and interest. And that outweighed, that factored into our decision of of our position that we took in the UN deliberations on Eritrean independence. But that was 1951. That was over 70 years ago. 70 years ago, we were at war with Italy and Japan, and they're now NATO our allies and partners. I mean, things change over 70 years. And in that 70 years, the United States United States played a critical role in welcoming Eritrea as a newly independent nation. And we supported, we welcomed them as a new democracy. Our bilateral relationship was very good in the early years. The Secretary Rumsfeld visited. Our then First Lady Hillary Clinton, Rodham Clinton visited. We had Peace Corps, we had USAID, we had military engagement, we had a robust, friendly relationship. And that the Ministry of Information has sought to portray it as that the United States has been hostile towards Eritrea from the beginning and up through till today. And that's simply not true. Our relationship has had good points and our relationship has bad points, but the relationship has had bad points because of policies that Eritrea took. In 2001, there was a horrible anti-democratic crackdown where the promise of the armed struggle was paused because of just the massive violations of human rights. And then in the mid-2000s, of course, Eritrea embarked on a number of regionally destabilizing policies that led to it being sanctioned by the United States, a sanctioned effort, by the way, that was supported by many African countries, as well as the United States and the EU and others. And now they're sanctioned, we've enacted sanctions again against 4 Eritrean entities and 2 Eritrean individuals directly responsible for Eritrea's destabilizing and human rights abusing military intervention in northern Ethiopia. And so let me address another issue that just because everyone knows about, and that's BODME. BODME is a complicated issue, and it's one that was very controversial. There are many views about BODME and the arbitration decision. And what I'll say about that is that in 2000, as part of there was the Algiers Accords, I'm sure all of you know, the process, the agreement that ended the 1998-2000 border war between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Part of that agreement, both parties, Ethiopia and Eritrea, agreed to submit the issue of BODME and the associated disputed territories to a binding arbitration panel. And in 2002, 2 years later, the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission ruled in favor of Eritrea. It ruled that BODME and those associated areas belong to Eritrea. And the United States urges both the governments of Eritrea and Ethiopia to implement the arbitration decision. There's a 2-part decision. One was, okay, the BODME and associated territories belong to Eritrea, and then the boundary needs to be demarcated, et cetera. And so the United States supports and encourages both Eritrea and Ethiopia to work together to implement the 2002 EEBC decision. Thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, Mr. Stephen Walker. The next question I would like to ask is, the U.S. government have interest in promoting peace and stability in the Horn of Africa. However, many agree that the regime in Eritrea is an obstacle to achieve peace and stability in the region. Recently, the Eritrean government's open involvement in Tigray war have created massive humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the region in general. Many still believe the US is tolerating a forked blunder in the region. Is there any policy or strategy in place to stop the regime's blunder in the region? Is there any red line that the US government cannot tolerate for the Eritrean government to cross?
The United States, including through the appointment of a special envoy for the Horn of Africa, has worked very hard to get all parties to the conflict in northern Ethiopia to stop fighting, and then to agree to to settle their dispute through negotiations rather than war. Now, one tool we've used, I mentioned that I was very proud of the efforts and the work that my colleagues at Embassy Addis Ababa and the special envoys have done to bring peace back to Ethiopia. And one tool they've used, or the United States has used, is diplomacy. We've conveyed, there's been a lot of diplomacy by my colleagues. And as for Eritrea, we've used diplomacy to communicate our concerns to the government of Eritrea, to seek to understand their positions, their viewpoints, their concerns, and to try to work together, and for our side to try to persuade Eritrea to withdraw its troops from the conflict, because they've simply destabilized an already destabilized region, and they've made their continued presence there just makes this humanitarian situation worse. Some of you will remember that Special Envoy Feldman visited Asmara in May of 2021, and we met with President Isaias and other senior officials, and had a very deep discussion on the conflict in northern Ethiopia. Another tool that we have and that we have had to use is sanctions. The President Biden last fall signed an executive order that sanctions any individuals and entities that are taking actions that are opposed to efforts to stop the conflict and to make sure that the humanitarian needs of people negatively affected by the war there are met. And the sanctions were for Eritrean individuals, entities, and to Eritrean individuals. President Biden has made it very clear that any individual or entity in the future that seeks to prevent progress or to make that conflict worse may also be subject to sanctions or additional sanctions.
Thank you. The next question would be, you might have answered it partially previously, but let's read it. Let me read it. Eritrean justice seekers are scattered around the world. They are ready to make change in Eritrea, given the changes to form a democracy. How does that affect American interests? I hope that will be clear.
It is clear, and I would say again that Eritrea's future is for Eritreans to decide.
Thank you.
Mr. Stephen Walker, I just want to ask a follow-up question from my previous question. As we know that, recently the war in Europe, the Russians are invading Ukraine, and then the only 5 countries cited by the Russians are including Eritrea. So at the same time, also, there is a lot of interest, the Chinese government and the Russians have a lot of interest in the Red Sea area. And given all the Eritrean government siding with the Russians, and then also the interest of the Russians and the Chinese people and the Chinese government in the Red Sea, how is the US looking this one from the interest perspective? You know, what are you, what is the government can do to, you know, protect your interests?
Thank you. That's a very great question and a very topical questions. A lot of people are talking about that. Let me answer it first by talking about US policy sort of just as a worldwide. And that is that, you know, the United States supports a rules-based international order. You know, we'll defend and strengthen international law, international agreements, principles, and institutions devoted to maintaining peace and security. That's what the broadly United States policy is. Now, in Africa, the United States has a strong track record of supporting economic development, human rights, you know, good governance, and respect for individuals. And we see African countries as partners in these, we share regional priorities, whether it's climate change or human rights or health. The United States has a really impressive record of health assistance in partnership, not just giving, you know, but partnership and building the capacity of African country health sectors, particularly with PEPFAR, the initiative to help Africans deal successfully so far with the HIV and AIDS epidemic. You know, at the same time, while we treasure our partnerships with African countries, you know, we don't want to limit the partnerships they can have with other countries. And we certainly wouldn't ask our partners to choose, well, is it China or us or Russia or us? You know, we respect the ability of African countries that are sovereign, proud nations, just like Eritrea is a sovereign, proud nation, to decide for themselves what countries they wish to partner with. You know, that said, however, I share your concern and surprise about Eritrea's vote in the United Nations. Its no vote on this critically important resolution condemning Russia's unprovoked, violent, horrible invasion of Ukraine. I mean, there were a handful of, I mean, literally, I mean, 4 of the countries or 5 that voted for Russia in this resolution. Even China abstained. Why the Eritrean government would want to endorse and support the invasion of one country, a strong country, against a weaker neighbor, I don't understand why it would approve of this kind of aggression. So I thought, and frankly, I thought at the beginning that maybe it was a mistake that the board of the United Nations that counts the votes, you know, there's just a mistake. And then, of course, there was a second vote, I think a day later or 2 days later in the Human Rights Council, where Eritrea again sided with Russia. And you see in the Eritrean media, the state-run media, a lot of the echoing of Russia's misinformation and false points about its invasion of Ukraine, its unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And so I don't know, I'm puzzled by it, and it's very unfortunate. That certainly, that would be a precedent that I think all responsible governments would want to make sure that they made, that we as an international community, especially the United Nations, that was created to ensure the peace and stability in the world, that we condemn unequivocally and very loudly the unprovoked aggression against other countries. And you look at what's happened since that vote, it's horrific. I know you watch the news, and the Russians are launching missiles deliberately into high-rise apartment buildings. They're attacking schools. They, for God's sake, they were shooting rockets at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant that could have had a worldwide catastrophic effect. Why the Eritrean government supports this, I don't know. I guess you would have to ask the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you.
They won't respond.
As you're joining us from our capital, Asmara, I would like to ask you from your observation, do you think COVID-19 is under control in Eritrea?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor and I have no medical training, but as best I can tell, the current COVID situation is pretty good. And we want to be, just as we, express our concerns and criticisms of the government on certain areas, especially on human rights, we also have to give credit where credit is due. And the government, I think, deserves credit for its effective handling of the COVID crisis. Although I wish they would accept the international offers of vaccines so that the Eritrean population could be vaccinated. They have not requested or accepted any of the many offers they've received. I don't understand why that's the case. But it's important to acknowledge that they've done a good job. And in the same way that, in child and maternal health, the Eritrean government has made, some really commendable progress. And as I mentioned earlier, the vaccination rates are some of the highest in Africa. That's something that all Eritreans should be proud of. I think that, just for balance, I think that the Eritrean government has made a real commitment to trying to focus and encourage equal rights for women. And I think that while in Eritrea and in the United States and in all other countries, we still have a lot of work to do in that area. I think little Eritrean girls grow up knowing that they're valued and that they are, have just as many rights and responsibilities to help build the nation as boys do. I would also compliment the Eritrean government on the fostering and the celebration of the diversity in Eritrea. That there are a lot of ways actually in which Eritrea and the United States are alike, and some of them we're both very diverse countries, and the Eritrean government has celebrated the diversity in languages. There are 9 ethnic groups here, as you all know, and they make a big effort to number one, value that diversity, to ensure equal treatment of all ethnic groups, and to take pride in that. And that's something that I think is great. There's also religious pluralism here that for centuries, now most there are a number of Catholics and evangelical Lutherans, but most Eritreans are either Orthodox Christian or Muslim, Sunni Muslim. And they've lived together mostly peacefully for centuries. And the government has worked hard to encourage that religious pluralism. And as there's a beautiful, probably all of you know it, but there's a vista that you can take a picture from in Asmara where you can see a Orthodox church, a Catholic cathedral, and then a mosque in the background. There's also there aren't any more Jewish people, unfortunately, in Asmara, but there's one a beautiful. Actually, I just visited it 2 days ago. A beautiful synagogue. Now, but that said, I would also say that there is religious pluralism in Eritrea. There is not religious freedom in Eritrea, and that's an important distinction. There are a number, if there are 4, and I know all of you know this, but there are 4, legal religious groups, and that's good. But then there are a number of small numbers, like people estimate between 5% of people are from other Christian evangelicals or Jehovah's Witnesses or other small Protestant groups. They're not allowed to register and to worship legally. And even worse, that when they do, they can be imprisoned. There are a number of people in Eritrea that are imprisoned because they worship to worship in a way that the government doesn't permit, and that's not acceptable, and it's a violation of Eritrea's international human rights commitments. All Eritrean citizens, all people everywhere, should be allowed to worship according to their conscience, and they should be able to worship the God in the way that they wish. And so we would also urge the Eritrean government to make beautiful Eritrean religious pluralism, even better with having full freedom. And we're talking about handfuls of people, so I don't really understand what the threat to anything is to allow, for example, evangelicals, Christians, to worship in their, they have a small house and they have a small group of people that, hold services and say prayers and sing hymns. Why not allow that? And certainly, why would you throw those people in jail? I don't understand it, and I hope that, that situation improves. And we think of those people also who are imprisoned for their religious beliefs in Eritrea, and we keep them in our prayers as well.
All right, Mr. Stephen Walker. As you know, Erisat is Eritrean satellite television is an opposition media. And then for you being today with us, do you think that there will be any consequence or any concerns raised by the Eritrean government? A lot of the supporters of the Eritrean government, they were asking for you to be a persona non grata. So is there anything concerns raised by the Eritrean Foreign Affairs or by the government of Eritrea? And then the second question is, what message do you think will this send to the people in Eritrea? Being you, the charged affairs of the United States in the opposition media, what message do you think will send to the Eritrean people inside Eritrea?
Well, I'm here, as all diplomats in SMR are, as a guest of the Eritrean government, and they have so far been, very, hospitable hosts. My hope is that I have always conducted myself in a way that is respectful and in a way that is in accordance with international laws and norms, certainly with the Vienna Convention, which dictates the practice of diplomatic missions. I have expressed my views about, and the United States' views, of course, about a number of issues, both in private, diplomatically with Eritrean officials, and I've expressed some thoughts publicly as well. And I hope that the Eritrean chargé, my counterpart in Washington, the Eritrean chargé at the Eritrean embassy in Washington, I hope that he, takes full advantage of being in the United States to travel around, to meet American people, just as I've met Eritrean people, and he should certainly feel free to express his views on issues in the United States. So I don't think that the Eritrean government will expel me, but that's of course a decision for the Eritrean government to make. And I'm sorry. And I think the other part of your question is, what do I hope the effect? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, the second question is, if you got it, or I can ask it again.
Yeah, my hope is that for a long time, that the Ministry of Information has created a narrative. And it's a narrative that denies Eritrean voices, frankly. My hope is that, while I can't, as I said, and I'll repeat it, that the future of Eritrea is for the Eritrean people to decide. So the role of the United States or any other country in that thing is limited to hoping for the best and support. But one thing that we can do is acknowledge the reality in a way that Eritreans, that you all as Eritreans, whether you're in Washington or Oslo or Riyadh or Rome, or Addis Ababa, or Eritrea itself. You know what goes on here. You know what it's like to live here. And that I hope that in our Facebook page and in my public comments, and including appearances like this, that we provide a voice for people who aren't allowed to have a voice. And it's simply to acknowledge the reality. And that, to me, that is I've been told anyway, that is something that Eritreans all over the world appreciate. That in this, there's a lot of narrative and blah, 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 that we tell the truth. We acknowledge the lived experience and the lived reality of Eritreans. And my hope is that that is meaningful for not for them, but for you. That's what I hope. And again, the government is going to say that the U.S. is engaged in regime change. We are not. But what we can do is envision an Eritrea, a better future for Eritrea, where the government, if it enacted, measures to improve its human rights, to end that bring national service back to 18 months. It's understandable that countries would need to defend themselves, to secure their borders. And by the way, the United States recognizes the importance of Eritrea's sovereignty, the importance of Eritrea's territorial integrity, and we are concerned about the bellicose rhetoric coming from all sides involved in the Tigray conflict. And what we do not need is an intensification or expansion of the warfare. Internationally recognized boundaries are very important and must be respected. But we can envision if the government would simply end that national service program. That's why would you want to in essence enslave your citizens? I don't understand it. There's not going to be economic development. There's not going to, if you treat your citizens like vassals, that's not going to be good for national development. But simply by adopting more coherent economic policies that would help lead to international investment. And even people from the diaspora that come and that have done well in the United States or Europe or Saudi Arabia or wherever, they want to come back and help their people. Having better economic and commercial laws that would facilitate that would be helpful. Having better human rights would enable and create a new vitality for Eritrea. That's what we hope for. That's what we envision. And I hope that, I and the U.S. Embassy can play, a modest role in supporting, that more positive, that more constructive vision of an Eritrea that spends its money not on destabilizing military operations abroad, but rather on development for its own people.
Thank you so much. I guess that will be all for today, as we can't keep you longer. We would like to apologize for our audience for not raising all questions due to time constraints. We would like to thank you, Mr. Chargé d'Affaires Stephen Walker, for being our guest and your open discussion, and for sharing your opinion with us tonight. And we hope to see you again, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Leila.
Thank you all.
And then I would like also to thank you, Mr. Chargé d'Affaires Stephen Walker. And a lot of people are praising what you are doing in Eritrea. And then you already know that many people call you the voice of the voiceless. We are very grateful. We are very proud of you. And we would like to continue what you are doing right now. We believe that when America does one thing, the rest follow. So we hope that the other embassies in Eritrea will follow what you are doing right now. Because the Eritrean people need somebody to tell their story. The Eritrean people need somebody to tell their agony from inside the country. We know that our people cannot say anything, cannot even say a word what is happening to them. So we are very, very grateful. This is not only my sentiment, but the people all over the world. Right now, there are more than 3,000 people watching you, following you via YouTube, Facebook. We have hundreds of people right now in person, and they are applauding you for coming today. We know the risk that you are taking to come and tell and then also express your side of the story. And I cannot tell you how much we are grateful. Hopefully, this should be the first, not the last. And we are hoping that we are going to have this communication in the future. We will hope that, we will have a further, wider, a lot of questions, because so many people are asking questions, but we couldn't ask you because of the time issue. But in the future, if you can give us another opportunity, the second opportunity, we would like to bring all the questions from the public and ask you. And then again, thank you, thank you. From Erisat, we are also very happy for coming to our platform. This means a lot to us. This means a lot to Eritrean justice seekers. And I cannot tell you how much I am grateful as Executive Director of Erisat, and how much my team are grateful for your team, for the people in the embassy. We have been working with you for the last 2 months, and then we cannot express our gratitude, the response that you showed us and everything. So I would like also to thank you, your staff members, your team members. I'm not going to name the names here, but all of them are great. And then say, please, thank you for everybody. Thank you, Mr. Steven Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all very much for having me. It's been a real honor to be with you today. And just let me tell you that it's been the honor of a lifetime to have been able to serve my country here in Eritrea. What an amazing country. And what, even more important than the country, what an amazing, people. The Eritrean people are just, I have touched my heart. And if I can be helpful, and if I have been helpful in any way, it means a lot to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you.